Tonight, a storm of accountability is sweeping through New Zealand's law enforcement system. The country's top police officials are under fire following what has been described as a catastrophic failure of leadership, judgment, and integrity. A damning 135-page report released by the Independent Police Conduct Authority has laid bare how senior officers mishandled serious sexual allegations against former Deputy Commissioner Jevon McSkimming. The report doesn't just expose administrative errors. It reveals a culture that protected power and silenced victims. At the heart of this scandal lies a disturbing question. When those who are supposed to uphold justice fail to apply it within their own ranks, what does that mean for public trust in the police? The government has called the report's findings atrocious on every level. Police Minister Mark Mitchell expressed deep outrage, saying the case has shaken confidence in the integrity of the force. In response, an unprecedented step will be taken: the creation of an Inspector General of Police, an independent authority with sweeping oversight powers to ensure accountability and transparency. This is not just a bureaucratic reform. It is a reckoning with a police culture that, according to the report, has for too long failed to hold its own members to the standards it demands from citizens. At the center of the controversy is Jevon McSkimming, once one of the most senior officers in New Zealand's police hierarchy. The IPCA report found that when serious allegations were made against him, including sexual misconduct, police leadership failed to take appropriate action. Instead of investigating, officers allegedly focused on discrediting the complainant, referred to as Ms. Z, a young police staffer who had previously been in a relationship with McSkimming. The report describes a disturbing pattern of behavior. When Ms. Z tried to raise concerns about non-consensual acts and threats, she was not believed. Instead, her emails, sent in frustration and desperation, were used against her. In 2024, Ms. Z was charged under harmful digital communication laws for sending accusatory emails to McSkimming and other police staff. Those charges were later dropped, but the damage was done. The IPCA found the police response characterized by inaction and an unquestioning acceptance of McSkimming's version of events. This culture of protecting senior officers, the report suggests, undermined the very foundations of justice the police are sworn to uphold. When misconduct is covered up or minimized at the top, it sends a message that rank offers immunity and that accountability is optional. The timeline of events makes for a chilling account of misplaced priorities. McSkimming's relationship with Ms. Z began in 2016, when he was 40 and she was 21. It ended 2 years later, but what followed was a series of escalating accusations and counterclaims. McSkimming told superiors that Ms. Z was blackmailing and threatening him, while she accused him of coercion and sexual misconduct. Rather than launching a thorough, impartial investigation, senior officers allegedly sided with McSkimming from the start. The police's internal correspondence revealed a reluctance to pursue the case, with one official reportedly saying they needed to manage risk around a promising officer's career. The IPCA report goes further, stating that Andrew Coster, the then Commissioner of Police, attempted to influence the nature and extent of the investigation. During McSkimming's promotion process, Coster also failed to disclose prior knowledge of the relationship and allegations to the Public Service Commission, a clear breach of ethical responsibility. These revelations raise uncomfortable questions about whether the highest levels of the police were more interested in protecting reputations than pursuing truth. It is a crisis not only of conduct, but of credibility. In the aftermath of the report, current Police Commissioner Richard Chambers has publicly apologized to Ms. Z, acknowledging that she was ignored and badly let down. His words were both an admission and a plea for change. Chambers condemned what he described as inexcusable attitudes that prioritized the ambitions of a senior officer over the well-being of a vulnerable woman. Analysts say this acknowledgement, while necessary, cannot undo years of institutional rot. The damage to the force's image is profound. Mark Mitchell, the police minister, insists that the appointment of an inspector general is not a symbolic move, but a structural safeguard, one designed to prevent power from shielding misconduct ever again. The new office will have the authority to audit police investigations, review internal disciplinary processes, and ensure that victims within the organization are heard without fear of retaliation. Still, critics argue that oversight alone won't be enough unless there's a deeper cultural transformation, one that dismantles the old boys network that has, for decades, insulated senior officers from scrutiny. The report's findings are particularly damning because they illustrate a systemic failure rather than isolated incidents. According to the IPCA, the investigation into McSkimming's conduct was markedly inconsistent with standard police procedures. While ordinary members of the public would be subject to rigorous scrutiny, a senior officer's career was apparently prioritized over the investigation of serious sexual misconduct. Experts say this highlights a deeply ingrained culture within the police at the time, one that valued hierarchy and reputation over accountability and justice. The effect, they note, is twofold. Not only are victims silenced, but public confidence in law enforcement erodes, leaving communities skeptical about the fairness and integrity of policing. This erosion of trust is compounded by McSkimming's subsequent guilty plea for possessing child sexual exploitation and bestiality material. While the IPCA report focused on the mishandling of sexual misconduct allegations, this development casts a long shadow over the force's internal oversight. The public sees not just a failure of procedure, but a failure to prevent dangerous behavior at the highest levels. In response, there is mounting pressure on both political leaders and police executives to demonstrate that these failings will not be repeated and that accountability will be real, not performative. For Miss Z, the human cost has been profound. As a young, unsworn staffer, she faced intimidation, disbelief, and even criminal charges for coming forward. Her experience underscores a broader issue in law enforcement. When victims report misconduct by senior officers, the system can fail them, leaving them vulnerable to re-traumatization. The IPCA report repeatedly emphasizes that the treatment of Miss Z was unacceptable and in stark contrast to standard practices that would normally protect complainants. Advocates for police reform argue that her case should serve as a turning point, demonstrating the urgent need for cultural and procedural changes within the organization. The political response has been swift. Prime Minister Chris Hipkins and Police Minister Mark Mitchell have publicly committed to implementing the IPCA recommendations. These include policy revamps, stronger oversight mechanisms, and the establishment of the Inspector General's office. Critics note, however, that implementation will be key. Structural reform, without a shift in culture, risks being superficial, ensuring that victims feel safe reporting misconduct, particularly when high-ranking officers are involved, will require both legal safeguards and a genuine transformation of workplace attitudes. The implications of the IPCA report extend beyond the immediate case. Internationally, police forces have faced scrutiny over similar failings, but the New Zealand example is stark because it implicates the highest echelons of the organization. The report demonstrates how power can be misused to shield perpetrators, and how institutional loyalty can override justice. Analysts warn that without sustained oversight, other misconduct may remain hidden, and opportunities for systemic improvement could be lost. For the public, the appointment of an inspector general represents hope, a tangible measure of accountability that did not exist before. It signals a willingness by the government to acknowledge past failures and invest in structural reform. Yet experts caution that restoring trust will take time. Public confidence, once eroded by inaction and favoritism, is not easily rebuilt. Transparency, responsiveness, and consistent enforcement of standards will be crucial in demonstrating that this scandal has prompted real change rather than temporary damage control. As New Zealand reckons with this extraordinary report, one message is clear: seniority cannot shield misconduct, and accountability must be absolute. The case of Jevon McSkimming has exposed not just procedural failings, but the very real consequences of a culture that protected power at the expense of vulnerable individuals. For Ms. Z, the apology from the current commissioner, while necessary, cannot erase the harm suffered. For the police, the task is now monumental: to rebuild integrity, restore public trust, and ensure that no officer, regardless of rank, is above the law. In doing so, New Zealand may set a precedent for law enforcement accountability worldwide, demonstrating that even entrenched systems can be reformed when oversight, courage, and transparency are prioritized above all else. The road ahead is challenging, but it is one the nation cannot afford to delay.